Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through the sources to pull out the key insights, basically giving you a shortcut to getting informed. Today, we're digging into a really fascinating and honestly sometimes intensely provocative piece of analysis. It claims to show how recent events have, well, dramatically shifted the power balance in the Middle East.
Yeah, we're looking at excerpts from a YouTube video transcript. And it makes some very bold claims about where the conflict between Israel and Iran is heading, with the U.S. obviously as a major player. Our mission today is simple. Unpack this perspective, understand its core arguments, and really look closely at the specific claims it's making. Some are quite surprising.
Definitely. What's striking here, I think, is how this source weaves together all these different threads.
Yeah.
Military actions, alleged diplomatic failures, things like that. It builds this very specific story, this narrative of shifting power, and a future that looks pretty unpredictable based on their view. We'll be looking at the details, the alleged facts they present, and what they see as the key turning points. Okay, let's dive right in then. The source kicks off with a pretty arresting claim about a ceasefire. It says that after Iran retaliated with ballistic missiles against U.S. bases, which, the source notes, followed U.S. bombings of Iranian nuclear sites, Donald Trump announced a ceasefire between the U.S., Iran, and Israel. That alone kind of upends the common timeline, doesn't it? What does the source say happened right after that supposed announcement?
It does, and the source immediately pushes back on that idea. It basically says, hold on, there was no real official ceasefire. And the evidence they point to, a really startling detail. Israel, this source alleges, bombed Tehran just 20 minutes after Trump's announcement.
Yeah.
So from this perspective, Iran, having just been hit, wasn't about to let the U.S. or Israel just unilaterally call it peace. The source draws parallels, to wars like Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, basically saying the enemy gets a vote as well. That really sets the tone for their whole argument.
Yeah, that alleged immediate aftermath paints a very confrontational picture right from the start. So from there, the source kind of zooms out to talk about what it sees as Israel's fundamental goals in the region. And it's a pretty stark portrayal. The source claims Israel has, and I'm quoting, zero desire to curtail its genocidal and homicidal activities in the region, and that it actually needs perpetual war to keep its enemies off balance in chaos. Those are incredibly strong words. How does the source try to back that up?
Extremely strong, yes. And controversial language, clearly characterizing Israel's actions that way. It asserts that Israel, in this analysis, must continue to, quote, dispossess, displace, and kill, all to sustain what the source calls its Greater Israel Project. Now, to support this specific point about intentions and actions, it gives numbers on alleged ceasefire violations. It claims 962 violations by Israel against Hamas in Gaza just in the first phase of one agreement, and then 2,740 against Lebanon. It even brings up an example about Hezbollah, claiming they were essentially gone after, quote, mistakenly trusting Israel. The source concludes really bluntly, no bargaining with thieves.
Okay, so after laying out that view of current intentions, the source then does something interesting. It brings up history, but maybe not the history people expect. It points to past cooperation, like Israel apparently arming Iran back in the 80s, and Iran helping the U.S. invade Iraq and Afghanistan in the early 2000s. That feels almost jarring compared to now.
It really does, and that's a key move the source makes. It highlights that past, perhaps surprising, cooperation. But then it pivots hard. It claims that recent actions, which it calls unprovoked Israeli and American attacks, mean there's absolutely no going back to this past. The source uses some very vivid, almost predatory language here, saying Iran now smells Zionist blood in the water, and that Israel is, quote, cloaked in the stench of its inevitable defeat. So, yeah, the source sees a fundamental, irreversible break from that complex past cooperation to just raw conflict now.
Wow. Okay, so beyond the politics and history, the source gets into military specifics, and some of these claims are, frankly, huge, if true. It asserts Israel is running desperately low of interceptor missiles for its air defenses. Just that one claim, I mean, that could change everything strategically. What else does it say about Israeli defenses?
Right, and that point is then amplified, according to this source, because it claims Iranian missiles, specifically ballistic and even hypersonic ones, which are known for being incredibly fast and hard to track, that these missiles completely overwhelmed Iron Dome. That's Israel's main air defense system we hear so much about. The source alleges this led to unprecedented and widespread destruction. It names Tel Aviv, Haifa, Beersheba specifically. And then it draws this really sharp contrast on ammunition. It claims Israel has maybe only days or weeks of ammunition left, whereas the source asserts the Iranian military could, quote, rain waves of missiles down on Tel Aviv every day for 6 consecutive months without any outside help. That's a massive disparity they're claiming.
A huge disparity. So if those military claims are what the source believes, what does it then say about Iran's nuclear path? It mentions that U.S. and Israeli leaders are supposedly unsure if Trump's earlier airstrikes actually managed to knock out Iran's stockpile of near bomb-grade material, and adds that independent assessments apparently found zero damage to critical infrastructure at Iran's nuclear sites.
Exactly. And this uncertainty, according to the source, is crucial. It then brings in Russia's alleged prediction that weapons-grade uranium enrichment will continue. And not only that, but that, quote, many other states are now willing and able to supply Iran with its nuclear needs. So the core argument here, from the source's perspective, is that Trump's actions basically backfire. They've, quote, pushed the Iranian regime to go nuclear, as quote. It says Iran feels it has no choice but to pursue the bomb because they just don't trust Israeli or American negotiators anymore. The source flat out says Iran needs nukes for its own survival and needs them now.
That's a stark conclusion, needing them now.
It is. And to drive the point home, the source uses this highly provocative analogy. It refers to the conflict in Ukraine, using the term, and again, we're quoting the source directly here, Genocide Joe for President Biden. The argument being that pushing Putin or any nuclear-armed regime into a corner is dangerous. It can lead them to see nukes as a weapon of last resort. And the source claims Trump and Israel did exactly that to Iran. They forced Iran into that very bunker of that last resort by, quote, carpet bombing the Persian country and decapitating much of its top leadership. This, the source argues, is leading Iran to rush to build a self-defensive nuclear bomb, drawing a parallel with North Korea.
And does it offer any specifics on that rush?
It does. It cites a renowned nuke weapons expert, unnamed in our excerpts, but cited by the source who supposedly claims Iran still has 400 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium. That's the stuff ready for bombs. And enough infrastructure, apparently, to turn that into 9 bombs within about 5 months, plus the potential for secret sites, of course.
9 bombs in 5 months. Okay. So given all that the alleged military weaknesses of Israel, Iran's supposed nuclear acceleration, the source seems to see a clear strategic advantage tipping towards Iran. It says, if smart, the Iranian regime will just keep the pressure on, continue to target Israel and prolong the conflict. Why? To drain Israel's military, its economy, and importantly, the will of its people.
Exactly. And this is set against the source's picture of Israel facing multiple internal crises. It lists them. More than 600 days of genocide in Gaza. Again, they're termed the Israeli economy, collapsing into a Great Depression, growing diplomatic isolation and deepening political divisions. A grim picture.
A very grim picture.
And on the other side, the source describes the Iranian regime as facing no real or viable political opposition, partly because of its repressive nature. And it makes the claim that the Israeli and American airstrike actually backfired politically too, that they succeeded only in bonding the regime with the Iranian people. More unity, not less.
So the source's bottom line is...
pretty unambiguous. The longer this war goes, the stronger Iran grows and the weaker Israel becomes. And it finishes with this truly chilling prediction. The ultimate price Israel will pay for what the source calls American hubris and violence is an Iranian nuke detonated in downtown Tel Aviv.
Wow. That's quite the forecast. And before wrapping up, the source adds one more point, right? A specific message about Gaza data.
Yes, a final point directed at the media. It criticizes what it calls invalid data about Palestinian deaths in Gaza, and it presents different figures, citing a new study by Harvard University. This study, according to the source, claims the Palestinian population was cut from 2.2 million down to 1.8 million since late 2023. That implies 374,000 dead. And it adds that women and children supposedly account for 75% of those deaths.
Sobering numbers presented there.
And the source's very last thought is a kind of plea. Never lose sight of Gaza while Israel and Iran are doing their thing. A reminder to keep that context in mind.
Okay. So we've just walked through a really intense, very specific interpretation of what's happening in the Middle East. It paints this picture of escalating conflict, claims of major power shifts, potentially irreversible ones, according to this source.
Yeah, this deep dive really highlights a very particular narrative, doesn't it? It's filled with specific claims, military capabilities, political motives, the alleged results of recent actions. It certainly makes you think about how different analyses can look at the same basic events and come up with vastly different, sometimes quite extreme predictions about where things are headed.
Absolutely. As you listen to this, what really stands out to you from this particular perspective? How do these specific claims, the alleged Iron Dome failures, Iran supposedly racing towards a bomb, how do they sit with your own understanding of the region's complexities?
It definitely raises a big question, I think. In this age of fast-moving conflicts, tons of information flying around, how do we pick out the real signals, the patterns that genuinely shape what happens next, especially when you encounter analysis that's as assertive and frankly as provocative as this one? It's certainly a deep dive that leaves you with a lot to mull over about how different people frame these critical conflicts.